Welcome to Out of the Blank.
Welcome to another episode of Out of the Blank podcast. I'm here with Johnjoe. John, please, for everyone out there listening, explain yourself, what you do, what you're about, what you like, what you're interested in, maybe a breakfast special if you have one.
My name's Johnjoe McFadden. I'm a scientist. I started off as a biochemist, then became a molecular biologist, then a geneticist, microbial geneticist, and now I call myself a systems biologist and a quantum biologist because my interests have strayed into the ethereal area of quantum biology, and I'm director of the Quantum Biology Doctoral Training Centre here at the University of Surrey in the UK. My breakfast listening tends to be Radio 4 in the UK, which is BBC radio channel, a news channel, and general interest channel.
When it comes to quantum, for instance, or diving deeper into the realm of, you said ethereal, or is it a deeper realm of the consciousness?
Well, it's
Complicated.
I said ethereal. It just came into my head, ethereal at the time. Ethereal means kind of a little bit mysterious, a little bit kind of delocalized, and that's really what quantum mechanics is about. When a system is quantum mechanical, it's delocalized, meaning that it's spread out in some kind of slightly weird way, and I use weird advisedly here, as Albert Einstein called the kind of spread outness of quantum mechanics weird. And it is strange. So in quantum mechanics, objects are neither here nor there, but they're a bit everywhere. And that is totally contrary to our perceptions. And I've always found that fascinating. And one of the biggest questions in science is, why isn't the world like that? Clearly, we see a football in a particular point in space. We don't see it in many different places. But the particles of inside an atom are in many different places at once. And the biggest question is really, how and why do we go from this quantum mechanical state where everything is ethereal, weird, and doesn't really correspond to our common senses, and the world we see that does. And what occurred to me many years ago when I first thinking about this was that life might be kind of special when it comes to thinking about quantum mechanics, because although we're big objects compared to atoms, atoms do make a difference in living organisms. The color of your eyes is determined by a gene that was present as only a single molecule in the sperm or egg that made up your genome. And that kind of sensitivity to atomic level events gives the possibility that quantum mechanics may have a bigger role to play in biology than it has in the rest of the world that's dominated by thermodynamics, the kind of random motion of atoms and molecules. So that first occurred to me more than 20 years ago. I wrote a book about it, Quantum Evolution, gained the interest of a physicist friend of mine, Jim Al-Khalili, and we wrote a paper about an idea we had. And then everything kind of went into abeyance for a while, and then in the last decade or so, it's really kicked off into an exciting new field of quantum biology.
That's like the most complicated response I've ever heard for literally an explanation that I wouldn't really, I would expect that, because it's what you just described is the scientific, I guess, reasoning people would just say because of God. You know, a lot of people, when they talk about our genetics, our evolution, our traits about ourselves, chalks up to God in a sense, if you are religious. But if you're a scientific person, you want to be able to describe what those are. And in my opinion, I mean, as much as people can say that society has de-evolved in so many ways, I'm like, the fact that we can recognize that we do have a consciousness, and the fact that there are people out there that want to dive deeper into what that is, how it is, what, like, that to me fascinates me, where I go, we're evolving in so many different ways. I just wonder if it's the best evolution in a sense. I feel like I brought this up a couple of times. It might be on the basis of the same topic, but the idea that our devices used to be a luxury, but are now becoming more of a requirement with jobs, and most a part of everybody's life that kind of needs access to the internet as much as a car is very helpful in a sense as well too. And I feel like in some areas we're starting to de-evolve, in other areas we are advancing ever so. I mean, like, the best example I would get, and this might be like more evolutionary, I guess, biology, but alpha males 50 years ago were big people. You know, they were outside in the middle of the snow building their own homes and doing these types of sorts. Now we have certain job outlets that do that, and now it seems like the beta male from back in the day is now becoming the more alpha male, because everything has been now pushing towards a new directional path, which I would say is technology. It's very, very accessible. A person like Bill Gates can be the top of everybody's or every lady's charts. When we look at back in the day, it was like having to have a bunch of biker tattoos in a sense. I mean, does that sound reasonable? Does that sound a lot like what's going on, or am I just off the board?
Well, it certainly describes what's going on. Whether it relates to anything in terms of the science that we're talking about, I'm not sure. But yes, certainly when I was growing up as a scientist, it was about it was like wearing your underpants outside your trousers, having saying you were a scientist and you were interested in this nerdy stuff that doesn't really didn't really attract the young women at the time. They were interested in the big beefy alpha males. But yeah, when science and technology has become the great money spinning enterprise of the 21st century, then the people who can wield the most technology can often make the most money. And that's ultimately based on science these days. So us nerdy scientists, perhaps not when they're as old as me, but the young ones can become the alpha males of the 21st century.
I just wonder if that becomes a deeper cellular change that starts to happen. I mean, if you think about physical adaptations, people being bigger than they were before, larger in size, and you start wondering how much, if you use your physical body, if everything translated over to a more digital version, like the metaverse, everyone's been like cracking jokes about, but it seems like it's becoming more a part of everyone's life. I wonder what that human capacity of the mind starts to expand. I mean, if we can recognize our own consciousness now and that we have that, and then you have people that try to dive into metaphysics, you land in this realm of like, is it is this what happens when you try to dive deeper into who you are as a person? Not like internally, but the brain. When you start realizing there's an atom and then everything's made up of atoms, and then you start going deeper than that down to the cellular, down through that, what's past that? You keep digging deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper. And I wonder if there is something that's going to be like a drop off or like a cliff in a sense, where you end up getting into this weird pathway where they're talking about other dimensions out there. Do you want to discover other dimensions? To me, that scares the crap out of me. But the fact that we know that is a possibility that they could exist, that, I mean, I might be off base on what a quantum or whatever that realm is, but I look at that like that's a deeper understanding of another step in human innovation, but also another step in an evolutionary process as well too.
Yeah, well, first of all, I kind of think the danger for humanity isn't us a greater consciousness, it's becoming a lesser consciousness as people are using the internet, social media, etc., to think for themselves. They don't make their own minds up, but they make their minds are made up by what they read or what they see on the TV and the sites that they click on. That's doing the thinking for them. And this I find is really worrying. It's much more likely that we're going to become dumber in the future unless we do something about this and stop this drive towards having all of our thinking done for us by computers. And I think this is what's happening when social media is driving our thought patterns uh, by feeding us the sites that it thinks we want to see, and what's going to sell more bucks, more advertising for the sites that are showing these. And I think that's more of a danger. But there is some, go back towards the question of quantum mechanics and what it tells us about this. That I think is something you won't get an answer to on the internet, because it's a tough, hard problem. Some very famous physicists, I think it was Feynman. It was Feynman who said, no, it was Bohr. It was Bohr said, if you think you understand quantum mechanics, you don't understand quantum mechanics. It's that weird. And it tells us that the world that is out there is actually a lot stranger than we imagine. And yes, it potentially has multiple dimensions in which lots of other things, other us's, other you, other me, maybe having different kind of lives. As far as we know, although there are these other, if you believe these multiverses, they call hypotheses, if you believe them, they are out there. You can't access them, and they don't have any influence on our lives, except by thinking about them and realizing, well, there's another world out there where I was more successful or less successful, etc. Those kind of things are in there in quantum mechanics, and you can believe all sorts of strange things, but they don't really influence very much the world around us. Whereas what we're saying in life, in the way that our cells work, the weirdness of quantum mechanics is kind of doing things like helping to put our food on our plate by making photosynthesis more efficient. The efficiency of photosynthesis is due to particles being in many places at once. And that's part of why photosynthesis is so successful at turning sunlight into the biomass on our planet. And sunlight, basically sunlight, air, water, and sunlight is by photosynthesis turned into trees and grain, such as wheat and corn, and ultimately us as we eat all that stuff. That is the most remarkable reaction in the entire universe, and it seems to involve quantum mechanics. So this is where I think quantum mechanics comes in when you look at the tiny, tiny things. Consciousness is another area, and it may involve quantum mechanics, but I haven't seen any evidence for it. But it certainly involves a jump in our conceptions of what's going on in the universe. Some of the matter, so the weirdest thing in the world, that some matter is aware of itself. How strange is that? I mean, this table in front of me isn't aware of itself. I am. That is the weirdest thing, that matter can be aware of itself. And that's what consciousness is. And we really don't understand that, although we have some theories of which I propose one myself.
Do you ever question if this would lead to the extinction of the human species in a sense? I know that sounds very, very dramatic, but my kind of take on it is, if you look up one conspiracy theory, you end up diving down a rabbit hole. If you're trying to understand yourself and you understand that there are dimensions, then what happens if there's dimensions in those dimensions? And if you start realizing that, yeah, it might not affect this plane, but it might not affect our physical, but could it affect our mental capacity in such a way? I mean, that's the fear for me, when you can come across someone who has schizophrenia or something that we don't really understand. Like, we understand something's not working properly, but to them, they're experiencing something that we'll probably never, ever be able to know. Someone that might hit their head and something might change. I start wondering, it's like, how deep, like if I sit there and question my hand, like having cells or particles in it, and if this desk is made of the same or different types of particles, well, if we're all vibration and frequency, can I just ram my hand through the table and it phased right through? You get to those points where you start questioning things that aren't true and aren't possible, but then you wonder, how could it be? Could it be if it was a different thing, if it was this, if it was that? And you start adding and doing and all these types of things. And you end up diving down this weird loophole in your head where you just wasted 35 minutes contemplating if your hand could phase face through a table. And I start wondering, if you research so much into the deeper parts, keep going deeper, well, there's got to be something deeper here and deeper here. Could you end up driving yourself insane? And I think that could be like the next step, which of what I would say an extinction.
Um, I wouldn't agree with the latter part, but certainly if people, I get letters every week or so from, and every scientist who is taught in the news gets the same, from people who claim to have discovered the secret of the universe, and it's completely clear to them, and they are absolutely convinced about it. And are they insane because the ideas they have are completely crazy? We would think, but to them they're real and they make sense. Why aren't all scientists crazy? If that was all you need to do, have a bad idea, because science roots itself on testing ideas, and you may have a crazy idea, but unless it fits the facts, scientists throw out the crazy ideas, and then you get left with, after you've thrown out all the crazy ideas, you get left with what we call science. And that's the stuff that we can agree on. Now, you could say, well, I think there's a fairy in this room, and that might be your reality. In some way, who could prove you wrong? All you can do is ask other people and say, can you see the fairy in the room? And if no one else sees a fairy in the room, you say, well, it's highly likely that the guy who sees the fairy is probably a bit mad. And that's how science has decided ultimately. There aren't ultimate proofs or anything. What we do is consensus. We come up with a theory that explains facts. And as long as everyone agrees on those facts, that there aren't fairies in the room, then it all makes sense and people will agree with each other and say, yes, this is science. But somebody who denies all those facts and makes their own facts up can come up with their own science, but it isn't how science works. Science works by rooting itself in consensus, getting replicated experiments, data that everyone agrees on, those kind of things. If you stick to that, you don't go crazy. At least I haven't yet, and most of the scientists that I've met are still pretty sane. But yeah, absolutely, you can go down many rabbit holes, and many people do. And it really comes from the approach, which actually goes back to ancient Greece and Plato, that you can just think yourself to the truth. You can't. If you try thinking yourself to the truth without reference to the external world and what other people see and their experiences as well, then you can go down a rabbit hole to madness. And that's what many people who write to scientists every now and again have done. And I feel sorry for them because they're often, obviously from what they're writing, they're very, very clever people that come up with a crazy but very clever idea. And but it's wrong in the sense that it doesn't correspond to the facts.
They say history repeats itself, and a lot of people use history as a kind of, to me, honestly, it's like a guidebook in a sense. A lot of these philosophy quotes, like I know Plato always gets mentioned on Twitter, or someone puts up a picture of a quote from Plato or something like that. And it really resonates with today's time period, where you start to question, is like, were they going through the same things as us? Maybe the time period's different, maybe the environment's different, but is it just a thing that's linear? Like, are we just experiencing the same things throughout human history? Has it just been problems that have just, maybe we have a couple new ones, like depression seems like it's hitting harder than it's ever did, but how do we know if we weren't able to talk to a lot of those people back then as well too? You start to question this belief of mysticism, religion, all these types of things that people felt like they had a power from somewhere else. Is this what happens when you think too deeply into something and trying to find an explanation for it? Because I feel like the human mind's ability is trying to find an explanation for something. Some people like to take, I wouldn't call it a lazy route, but take a more easily explainable one by saying it's God. And then other people want to define what that is. People want to go deeper into the realm of that. I mean, in parts, it's all depending on what your perspective is. But to me, it's a deeper understanding of trying to discover oneself, which is interesting in its own, because to me, like I said, that's one of the most amazing things I think humans have, the ability that me and you can have a conversation like this, or have a type of discussion, and it be, I mean, I'm trying my best to keep ground with you, but at the same time, it's 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 a conversation, it's communication, and it's deeper than that. It's our voice being able to produce words, and words that we all agree what they know. And you start, like I said, you dive deeper into it, you slowly start going insane. It's like, oh my God, I can't forget to breathe.
Yeah, yeah. Again, I kind of think, yeah, you can go down these. I think actually Plato's an interesting one, and relates to my more recent book,
That's what I'm trying to bring it to.
Occam's Razor, and this medieval philosopher called William Ockham, because he was fighting against Plato, really, because that had been the dominant philosophy, and also Aristotle at the time. And they both thought that there were invisible stuff that underpinned reality. So, for example, a chair would have an invisible essence of a chair. A table would have an invisible essence of a table. A father would have an invisible essence of a father. And these were important because they also believed, for example, that kings had invisible essences of kings. Slaves had invisible essences of slaves. Serfs had invisible essence of serfs. So the whole rigid structure of the ancient and the medieval world was kind of justified on the basis that these people were born with an essence of something. So it was important, and it determined structure. William Ockham determined medieval structure as society structure. William Ockham said, no, these things don't exist. And this is the first route to sanity. To say that the stuff that you don't need doesn't actually exist until you give me a need for it. So William Ockham, for example, as I said, Plato or Aristotle would have said fathers are fathers because they possess an essence of fatherness, which you call universals or forms. William Ockham said, no, fathers are fathers because they have sons and daughters. That's all it is. It's just that the world is made by the relationships between objects, not kind of invisible essences. So William Ockham got rid of all of that. He's famous for his razor, which says that entities should not be multiplied beyond necessity, which means that make our models of the world of the smallest number of parts. And this is really the core of science, and how it is different from the pseudoscience, the mysticism, and religion, which all invent stuff which you don't really need. You don't really need angels to explain stuff. Do you need demons and spirits and conspiracy theories? No, you don't really need them. But people like them, just as people like to believe in angels that push the moon around, or evil spirits that caused illnesses. They found those were an easy way of thinking about things. If someone got sick, wow, it was this evil spirit. And then they discovered bacteria and viruses and that kind of stuff. And then you don't need the evil spirits anymore. So this is what science is about. And this, I think, is down to William of Ockham and his razor, and saying that you build science. When you're doing science, you build the world, the models of the world from the smallest numbers of parts. So, for example, give you a very concrete example, in pre-Newtonian world, the physics of the sky, the objects in the sky, like the sun and the moon and that kind of stuff, it was described by equations. People could predict the motion of Mars and Venus, but it didn't relate to anything on Earth. So there was two realms: the world of the heavens and the terrestrial world, the world around us. And what Newton did was said, no, there's only one world, and it includes both the heaven and the Earth, because we can explain the motion of the planets with the same set of rules that we use to explain the motion of an apple when it falls from a tree. And that was an extraordinarily powerful simplification of the universe. It said there's one rule for how things move in gravity, and it accounts for both motions in the heavens and motions on Earth. And that's really the basis of science. But it's also, I think, the basis of rationality, the basis of sanity, if you start believing in stuff that you don't have evidence for, that is going down that rabbit hole to madness.
Why do you find that people are, or what do you think why people are attracted to something like that? Something deeper than that. I feel like science in a way, it's very critical, obviously, but it's also what people would conflate critical with cold. It just seems like more people love the idea of a sky being that's watching down above them, or some type of aspect like that, or creature that controls the seas, or Bigfoot or anything like that. It's just mysterious, and it's more like wonderment of what we maybe capturing innocence from being a child, of what we were raised upon, stories and all that as well too.
Yeah, it's I believed in Santa Claus when I was a kid, and then I didn't. Many people believe in Bigfoot when they were kids, and then they don't. Some people continue to believe in Bigfoot, and that's really where science and mysticism part ways. Because just as you can't find evidence for Santa Claus in the real world, you can't find evidence for Bigfoot or Elvis living on the moon or crazy ideas about uh, COVID being caused by aliens from space or some conspiracy of Bill Gates or whatever. People like to believe in things that agree with their own perception of the world. And this is, as I said, it's the essential thing of having thinking for yourself rather than the science is about thinking for yourself and working things out for yourself, but with always checking what you work out against the real world. People forget that bit, that last bit, which is okay, does what I'm saying make sense against the real world? And is it something that other people can agree to? If I believe that Elvis is living on the moon, can anyone find him? Anyone see evidence of him? And that's where science kicks in. It says you've got to have evidence, and that evidence has got to be convincing to other people as well as yourself. And that's the key bit. Lots of people are easily convinced. Even scientists can be easily convinced by evidence which isn't very convincing. But ultimately, at the end of the day, you've got to make it convincing to everyone else if you want to call it science.
In your new book, what are you really trying to show to people who read it?
I'm trying to show really the fundamental way of making sense of the world is this getting rid of stuff you don't have any evidence for. And this may be somewhat a kind of, well, it can be, as you say, demystifying. And demystifying can be cool. It can be hard to, when you tell your kids Santa Claus doesn't exist. And my son cried when I told him that. And, yes, it can be tough. But which is better to have an erroneous picture of the world which is comfortable to you but doesn't make sense, and you will crash upon it because it doesn't correspond to the real world, or to build your own comforts, your own vision of what is important in life, but out of the real bricks and bones of the universe, not the stuff in your head. And it's the way I think, that's what I think is the important message I'm trying to get across in life. Is simple. That life can be simple, but we can make it a lot more complicated by inventing loads of stuff. Keep it simple, and your life will be simpler and more satisfying, and you will be more successful, and you'll be able to make more sense of the world.
I'm curious how you wrote that, because it's just going to be hard, because even demystifying something, you're going to get death threats, dude. Like, that's a lot of people are so ready to pick up a pitchfork over their ideas or their illusions. And I think everyone's afraid of that second where their illusions become shattered, like when the magic's kind of gone. And honestly, it's like with me and like the government stuff, for instance. I want to be upfront with everything. I want to see it all. I don't really want any illusions around me, because if you know you're living in a lie, wouldn't you want to escape that lie? Wouldn't you want to be a part of what the realness of it is, no matter warts and all? And it seems like a lot of people aren't happy with that. A lot of people rather just stay in a dream state, like everything runs off of uh, candy and gumdrops.
me, for example, that um, in fiction, I read a lot of fiction, and I started reading fiction, fantasy and sci-fi, and this is all magic and weird stuff, and Star Wars and ray guns and all that kind of stuff. It's all magical, and we love it. Scientists, scientists are great fans of Lord of the Rings and other fantasy kind of stuff, and many of them are brought up on Harry Potter. So it's okay to believe in magic in a fictional sense, and it's great. It makes great stories. It's great fun, and I think that may be why scientists often like this stuff, because it provides a contrast and a relief from their own work, which is kind of hard-nosed. Get rid of the stuff you don't need. Make sense of the world with a minimum number of parts. But if you don't need to turn your life into an exercise in that. As long as you make sense of, as long as you know what you're doing, you can read fiction about magic and fairies and whatever you like, but don't believe they live in the real world. And that works for most people, I think, but not for everyone. Many people do want to build these mythologies around themselves. And many parts of the world, they still live in these mythologies, the various mythologies of religion and all sorts of mystical beliefs. Fine if you keep it to yourself, and you do whatever, have ceremonies amongst yourself about worshipping some god. Fine, but don't feel you have to impose them on other people. And this is the danger of believing in this stuff, that there's no relation to reality, that people can't agree on. Then people will always disagree, and we know that your vision of what is good and what are the good things to do will be different. And religion and mysticism and belief in pseudoscience and conspiracy theories, everyone can believe in that stuff, but then it leads to conflict, because everyone will build their own reality around them, and or around them with some other people who believe the same kind of stuff. And you build your little cocoon of reality in which everything makes sense within this cocoon, and every fact that you give them, they'll somehow manage to manipulate it and say, well, that's okay. Elvis really does live on the moon because this happened. And it'll make sense within this cocooned world in which people are checking onto social media, reading only the stuff that they want to believe in. And that's the only thing that's affected them. And people will live in these cocoons until they meet another cocoon, and then they'll fight. And that's where conflict comes into the world, I believe, largely from that kind of clash of mysticisms, different kind of mysticisms, religions and politics, and things which people say, no, this is the truth, this is right, as if it exists independent of the people who think it. And this goes back to Plato and Aristotle, who thought that. William of Ockham said, no, nothing exists independent of the people who think these ideas. So it's the only way you can reach some kind of reality that people can agree on is through consensus. If the whole world believes in something, then we'll say it's real, like the moon being up there.
Well, with the inevitable division amongst people, though, that's the crazy thing is that everyone seems like there's categories of flat earthers, and then there's categories and subcategories of even more flat earthers that believe it goes deeper and deeper and deeper. Then some of them will be like, that's too deep for me, but others keep going. That subdivision within a subdivision within a subdivision, everyone branching off, even though it's the same topic, they're individual groups and branch ways of where it goes. For me, my fear is future generations. If we look back at history now, we have a record, but it's like a lot of it has gaps. I'm looking at it like with the future generations, there's going to be gaps. And when is horoscopes weren't accepted as science, but now it's under pseudoscience, numerology, pseudoscience, whatever you want to say. How long until that becomes the general public's idea and that becomes now an actual scientific field? That's the thing is it gets down some weird territory where you start looking at the goal line keeps moving every single time.
Yeah, and I think this is where social media and the other influences are and so allowing people to build their own mythologies around themselves, and they're unshakable. I remember what prompted me to first think about this problem was when I met creationists, and I remember I was at a meeting in Arizona, and went to see the Grand Canyon, and I met someone there who was a creationist, and I said, "How can you be a creationist when you've got all this stuff out there?" And he says, "Well, I point out, fossils, for example, have been pulled out of these rocks. And look, there's some here." And he says, "Well, that's of course from Noah's the flood. It's described in the Bible, the Great Flood." And I said, "Well, what about the fact that if you look at this great cut through the earth, like the Grand Canyon has done, if you look at different layers, you find different fossils?" And he says, "Well, that's caused by hydraulic sorting. Different fossils of different shapes and sizes, and they will sort to different layers in the rocks." I said, "Okay. What about the fact that you think this was 5,000 or so years ago? So that was correspond to the time when the pyramids were built. And wouldn't the pyramid builders have noticed that their pyramids were underwater for 100 years or so, and they would have written about it afterwards?" And it's, "Oh, you don't believe the dating of the pyramid of the ancient Egyptian kingdoms, do you? That's been proven wrong."
They find
And you go
loopholes in
on and on.
everything. Oh my
And they go
God.
on and on and on. And this is it, that ultimately, if you are clever enough, you can come up with an explanation for every deviation from your mythology, from your own personal mythology. You'll come up with an explanation. And this is why William Rockham's point is so important. He said, "No, get to the simplest explanation." The thing about the creationists that I met, his explanation was it had layers and layers and layers and layers and layers. So it was extraordinarily complex. Or you believe in evolution. And then suddenly all those layers collapse and everything becomes simple. That's what science drives us to do. Get rid of the stuff you don't need and find the nuggets of real facts. And that's what science is all about. And if people keep doing that, then we'll remain on firm foundation and remain rational. But yes, if people go into their own little worlds of social media and then virtual realities and all of these kind of things, and kind of clubs in which they'll make their own realities and believe in their own different stuff, then I think we are heading for disaster.
And the term science, that term's being hijacked in many forms now. People put trust science or whatever on a post. They have no idea what they're talking about. You're coming across a lot of people, citizen scientists, I would say. And I know NASA tosses that out there for if they have a problem and a general public solves it, that's one thing. But when you have people that are using that in their bios and giving advice to things or topics that a regular person doesn't know, they're not able to decipher. I've probably debunked 3 scientist accounts on Twitter. People that were saying, "Oh, I'm this person. I study molecular physics." And then I'll be like, "Okay." I take their profile picture, I do an image search, and I find it for a Viagra commercial. I swear to you, I can't make that up. This is 100% true. And I messaged them. I was like, "Why would you? This is the Viagra commercial." And they go, "I have to protect my identity." Now we're entering really weird, that's misinformation territory where there's a person giving a consensus and has a large following, I would say, of people that believe that this is an actual person and are not taking the time to be able to sort that out. See where my fear starts to come in, where I start wondering how long until society is just more happy with the one that fits their narrative compared to the actual science behind it, where actual scientists like yourself are end up going to be just labeled as another one of those. And it's like another one of what? People that are trying to find out the truth, but it's going to be seen as it's honestly it's attack on science. I know that happened a while back too, but I'm saying it's going to happen. It's going to get worse.
Yeah, I agree. It is one of the more one of the areas of popular culture that I dislike a lot these days is the celebrity culture, where people think, if you want to get your view on some scientific fact, they go to a celebrity who's a pop singer or a film star and say, "What do you think about this?" And they believe that. And people have authority because they're celebrities, really. And people will follow celebrities and believe in their opinions, and the celebrities can be as mad as everyone else. So there's no truth to be found in celebrity, and yet people worship it these days, it seems. So, but I come back to that ultimately, yeah, everything that we have around us, the social media, the TVs that allow pop singers to sing and promote their songs and films to be shown, it all depends on technology. And it all depends on science and technologists who are eschewing the mysticism to stick to the science. So it can't be everyone will go that way, or the world will collapse because no one will be able to make a TV or make it work, or a computer, and but then there's a kind of danger there that there'll be people who avoid all of the scientific stuff, becoming entirely dependent on a smaller group of people who run the science, who make the computers, who broadcast the information. And I think it could lead to a non-democratization of science, that a large part of the population could avoid science and just be content to get fed the myths and the stories. Again, Plato came up with this idea thousands of years ago. He said that what he called the noble lie, that the rulers of a city should lie to their citizens in order to keep them contented, a lie about what's going on in the world, what's the real truth. And I think that is a possibility, that the most powerful people in the world who are controlling the media will be able to have enormous power over the rest of the world if the rest of the world is content to get its truths from their media rather than the real world.
Do you think that there's a way to swing the narrative in the opposite direction of a mystic belief or something of that sort? Not like saying that you need to take away religion, but more of a logical aspect of making critical thinking, or bring that back, like just critical thinking in general. It seems like everyone's in a hysteria. And I think that is the money aspect to a lot of things. For some reason, that demon has rent on our headspace. It has literally made our worst aspects of our character come out. It has caused a competition aspect that is worth making money to eliminate someone's life dream. And to me, that seems like a hinder on society's progress. I mean, to think that Plato was the only person back then, or one of the only few that were speaking such philosophical quotes or these ideas, is to me is asinine. I feel like there's a deeper discussion there. I feel like there's probably way more people that had that aspect to them, that had that mindset to them.
Yeah, I'm sure there were many, many more people who, well, we know there were lots of philosophers in the ancient world, and they had very diverse opinions. Without science, everyone can have diverse opinions, and no one can prove anyone right or wrong. And this is, of course, the great thing that science did. It found a way of saying, okay, you may disagree over who's your ruler or who is your god, but you can't disagree about the value of pi. And everyone, and even aliens from outer space, would agree with the value of pi. So those rules like the square on the hypotenuse is equal to the sum of the squares on the other two sides. Those facts are facts for everyone, and as far as we know, every being in the universe. So that's the kind of certainty that we expect for science, that if you, for example, take an element, it will have the same properties to someone on Mars as someone on Earth. And those are the kind of things we expect from science. And as long as we retain that, then we will continue to be rational. But if we lose that and make our own realities, then we're going backwards. We're going back to the medieval world where people believed in angels and demons and sickness that came from curses, and that kings had this essence of royalty that they could pass on to their children, that gave them the right to rule other people. And slaves would always be slaves, and their children would always be slaves. That's the kind of world we could slip back into if we allow reason to be lost in our own little dream worlds.
Are you hopeful for the future, like future generations at the path we're on now?
Yeah, I am hopeful. I am hopeful that that will not happen. I don't know what the answer is at the moment in terms of social media and the influence it has, because I think it's unhealthy. But still, most people are sensible and rational. It's just that the focus is often on the non-rational minorities, but they are substantial minorities at the moment. There's no question that they are influential and have power, and that is worrying. But I would hope that reason will prevail, because ultimately it's reason which makes the world wealthy and healthy. Things like our longevity. We we live longer by about a year for every 3 or 4 years. The longevity increases by about a year. That's happened because of science and technology, not because of mysticism. All the things around us, computers and motor cars and phones, they all depend on science. So we can't lose it, otherwise the world would fall apart. So ultimately, I think the value of science will retain our grasp on reason.
Well, that calmed me down a little bit. Where can people find your book? Where can people find any of your links? One more time, you have the book right beside you if you want to show it on screen for everybody out there watching the video.
Sadly, I didn't bring it with me. I should have done.
Got it all stored up in your head.
Yes, the book is called Life is Simple. It's published by Basic in the US and in other countries like the UK. And other books, Life on the Edge, which is a book I wrote with Jim Al-Khalili, is published. It was published in 2015, if I remember, maybe earlier. And Quantum Evolution, published 20 years ago, was my first foray into thinking about quantum mechanics and life. So they're all available in good bookstores.
Well, I'll make sure I link all your links in the description, and I appreciate you for doing the podcast.
Yeah, my website, by the way, is johnjoemcfadden.co.uk. johnjoemcfadden.co.uk. So you'll find links to my ideas and books and articles I've written there.
Twitter? No.
Twitter, Johnjoe McFadden, hashtag Johnjoe McFadden.
Okay. All right. Well, thanks.
I know it's the and symbol for Johnjoe McFadden.
I'll link it all in the description. I'll find it. I follow you on Twitter. Thanks everybody for listening to this episode of Out of the Blank. Stay tuned for our next episode.